Hello. I'm going to be talking about 3 projects which touch on today's theme of being alive in 3 different ways. Where does life originate from? Why do we dress and look the way we do? And the experience of being alive for different people around the world. As a photographer, I use the typological process, which is the process of making many similar photographs of the same kind of thing, or examining something by type. And a single image isn't that important, but when you see them as a collection, a pattern emerges to form a much more meaningful narrative. The first project I'll show is Where Children Sleep, which is 58 portraits of children in their bedrooms taken in diverse situations around the world. And the project came about after I was asked to come up with an idea for a children's charity. And as I thought, how do you go and photograph needy children from the developing world in a different and engaging way? I thought of the familiar children's charity pictures that you see, which are normally children emotively smiling at you or pleading with their eyes. And I think I always had a sense that when I saw these pictures, they worked on a very simple level, and I never really felt that I understood that much about their life. So I thought back to my own childhood, and I thought that the space you could probably tell the most about me was my bedroom. And I wondered if by showing the bedrooms of children around the world, whether that would be an interesting way of understanding more about their lives. So I came up with this idea to photograph the children on a plain background and then their bedrooms separately. The idea being that the children would be treated equally, and then the bedrooms would give you a glimpse of their life and a short text, a better understanding. And I also decided that I didn't want it just to be about children that are helped by children's charities, because I think there's often a sense that when you see images from places like Darfur, that these people live on in a kind of hell that looks like another planet from our own experience in the Western world. So I decided I wanted it to include fortunate children, and therefore it would give a sense that we all live together on one planet, as well as being an exploration of the inequalities that exist. So I'm going to show you some of them. This is Lele, who I photographed on the border of Thailand and Burma. And when her mother died, none of her family came to collect her, so she was put in an orphanage. And in this orphanage, during the day, it was the classroom, and then at night, they would clear away the desks and tables, and it became their bedroom. And each child had one box with which to keep their belongings. This is Kaya, who I met on the street, dressed like she is in the photo in Tokyo. And when I went back to her bedroom, I was completely amazed by all her toys. And she had a collection of wigs, and she had this collection of dresses which had been made by her mum. This is Jazzy, who I photographed at a beauty pageant in Kentucky. And that's how she'd performed in the pageant. And when I went back to her room, it was filled with all of these crowns, and she'd already entered 100 competitions, and her mum was telling me how it cost an average of $1,000 for each pageant that she entered, with the fees and the travel and everything, which meant that her mum had spent $100,000 on her already, and she was only 4 years old. Home for this boy, a Romani gypsy, was this mattress with his family on the outskirts of Rome. And they had their house destroyed a couple of weeks before by the Italian police because it was built illegally. This is 6-year-old Leholo, who was an AIDS orphan. When his father died from AIDS, his mother was so distraught that she ended up abandoning the children, and he's now looked after by his brothers, and they slept all together in one room, which was also the kitchen. This is 7-year-old Indira, who I photographed at a stone quarry on the outskirts of Kathmandu in Nepal, and she'd worked in the quarry since she was 3 years old. And she lived in this one room with all of her family. They slept in this one bed. This is Justin, who had played for his local football team since he was 5 years old. But his dream is to either be the mayor of New Jersey and if not a poker player. Yeah. So this is Alicia, who I photographed in the Appalachian Mountains in Kentucky. And she lived in this kind of decrepit house that was heated by a wood-burning stove. And what I found kind of shocking was the fact that both of her parents worked. Her mum worked for McDonald's and her dad worked for Walmart, yet they were still kind of really living on the poverty line. This is Ahot, an 8-year-old boy from the Kraho tribe in Amazonia, and the red paint that he has on his chest is from a ritual, and the tribe believed that the sun and the moon created the universe. And it was really the tribe's kind of struggling how to keep its traditions alive with the encroachment of the modern world. This is Dong, who I photographed in rural China. Currently, just over half of China's population lives rurally, but with 20 million people moving to the cities each year, that demographic is changing. Jaime, I photographed in on his Fifth Avenue apartment in New York. And he'd arrived at a casting for another job I was doing, and he was dressed as he was in the picture, which is his school uniform. And I was completely amazed how a 9-year-old child could already look like a businessman. Here's Bikram. His parents had both died in Nepal in the Civil War, and he now lived with his grandfather in a very remote village that was a 2-hour walk from the nearest road. This is Fika, who lived in a gated community for Orthodox Jews in the West Bank. And in this community, televisions are banned, newspapers are banned. The average family size was 9 children. He shared his room with a couple of his brothers. And at the school he went to, they only studied religious studies with a bit of time for maths and Hebrew, so sport was banned from the curriculum. This is 11-year-old Doha, who was one of 11 siblings who lived in a refugee camp in the West Bank. And their house had been destroyed by the Israelis after her brother had blown himself up, killing 23 civilians, and she had this martyr picture of him in her room. This is Juan David, who I photographed in a barrio in Medellin, and his family was an internally displaced people. They had to flee the violence that kind of was surrounding the drug trade in their home village. This is Joey, 12-year-old Joey, who I photographed in Kentucky, and I'd contacted him through a hunting group, and when I went into his bedroom, I just couldn't believe it. But I have to say, I was quite jealous of his camouflage teddy bear. I don't know if you see that. This is 12-year-old Lamine, who was a pupil at the local village Islamic and farming school, and they got up every morning. They worked in the fields from 6 until lunchtime, and then in the afternoon they would study the Quran. This is Prina. She was a domestic help girl in Nepal, and when I saw where she slept, she was sleeping in this kind of cage-like place at the top of the stairs, and she works from 5:30 in the morning until 6:30 at night, and was receiving just $6.50 a month for working that hard. Nantio is a girl, 15-year-old girl from the Rendili tribe in northern Kenya. She would soon be undergoing female circumcision. You can tell that her status by how many necklaces she has around her neck. And this is Kana, who I photographed in Tokyo. Again, her passion was fashion, but her mum wasn't approving, so she had just taken a Saturday job to pay for buying wigs and her various clothes. So I'm going to just take a minute. I mean, I think we've seen how hard life can be for humans around the world, and I'm now going to show you another project that shows you that it's not that easy if you're an animal either. James and Other Apes is 50 portraits of chimpanzees, gorillas and orangutans. And I got the idea for the project after watching a nature program on primates, and I was struck by their facial similarity to our own. And then I thought how you tend to think of animals and apes generically, and I thought that maybe if I applied the aesthetic of the passport photograph, the photograph that we all use in our identity documents, whether you'll look at them as individuals. So I also knew that I didn't want to use a telephoto lens. I wanted to make more intimate portraits, and that meant I had to find a way of getting in with the animal. So that meant I travelled first to Cameroon, where I met James, to Congo, the Republic of Congo, and Indonesia. And it was also a way of being able to highlight some of what was happening to them. And I decided early on in the project that I just wanted to photograph the great apes rather than monkeys or primates, because I think that as humans we're clearly different to animals, especially those lower down the evolutionary chain, such as a worm or a mouse. But for me, the great apes inhabit that grey area between man and animal, because we share over 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees and are closer to chimpanzees than chimpanzees are to orangutans. And it interested me that in a Gallup poll last year, just 39% of Americans believe in the theory of evolution, with over 40% that believe that man was created by God in his present form. But I've noticed something interesting, that when kids look through the book, they'll look through it and they'll find a face and they'll say, that looks like me. Whereas when adults look through it, they'll kind of find like a family member or a friend. Yeah. But for me, what is important is that we see our faces reflected back in the faces of animals, because for me, this is who we were and this is also who we are. This is Lavielle, who was a 27-year-old chimpanzee who'd been kept in a cage for the first 15 years of her life. And after she was rescued, it took her 6 years before she had the confidence to come out and step on the grass. Gregoire, who was 60 years old when I took this picture, he had been rescued by Jane Goodall from Brazzaville Zoo, and when he died at the age of 65, was thought to be the oldest chimpanzee in the world. Katie, she had a mental disorder. She'd been kept in a small box. Pumbu had been re-released into the wild and was now the second female in her group, and she's since given a birth to her son called Bosomi. Lulu was also in the re-released group, and she'd been found when she was very small in a hunter's hut, sitting next to her mother's decaying head. Khan, who was just 6 months when I took that picture, he had been confiscated from a hunter when he was 2 weeks old. Haydar, a young orangutan. Orangutan means man of the forest in Indonesian. Jovan didn't like to sleep alone. Yauk. And all of these apes that I'm showing you are under real threat from two things, from the loss of habitat and from the human population explosion. And all of them had their parents killed in front of them. In the case of the orangutans, it was for the live pet trade. And for the gorillas and chimpanzees, it was for the bushmeat trade. This is Millie, who was a little orangutan who had cerebral palsy, and she needed constant care. Fizzy was a bonobo. Bonobos are our closest cousins, and they resolve conflict with sex. Yeah. This is Gnocchi, who'd been rescued from the war in Congo and had to be given mouth-to-mouth resuscitation when she arrived to Tango. And Quitty, yeah. So some of you might be wondering how I managed to get them to look in camera, and I had two methods. First, I used to use a piece of Scotch tape, and I'd scotch a peanut onto the end of the lens. But it worked, but the problem with that is that they would swing for my camera. So I'd noticed that they used to groom each other as a kind of way of building bonds and as a sign of friendship. So after a while, I'd go up to them, I'd groom them, I'd start on their arm, and I would make my way up their arm, and then I would go to their chin, and I'd put a hair out, and I'd move it to my lens, and as I did that, they thought I'd taken a flea, and they'd go like that and look in the camera. And I think the pictures also, they seem very calm, but they don't give you a sense of the pandemonium that was kind of going on. I learned I had to have, I invested in some trainers which didn't have shoelaces because they would try to untie anything that they could. This is Pumbu in her re-released habitat. I trekked for a couple of days to find her. That's showing Lulu her Polaroid, and she was fascinated by that Polaroid. But I mean, I couldn't understand it. She knew it was another gorilla. I'm not sure if she knew it was herself. And that's how I've exhibited the work. So I'm now going to show a book called The Disciples, which is 62 montaged photographs of fans before they went into concerts or before they left concerts. And I think with the apes, I'd been interested in presenting groups as animals, as individuals, whereas with the disciples, I wanted to look at how individuals form groups to create their identity. And I got the idea for this on a trip to Los Angeles, and I was looking around and I thought, God, loads of the girls look like Britney Spears. This was a few years ago. And I wondered if it was like a conscious decision on their part. So I set up this website called doyoulooklikeBritney.com. But after a couple of months, I didn't have any responses. So I thought, this isn't working as a way of meeting people. So I thought, maybe if I go to a Britney concert instead. She wasn't touring, and I saw Marilyn Manson was. And I thought, I wonder what Marilyn Manson's fans look like. So I went to this concert, and I was amazed by what people were wearing. But then when I got the film back, I was looking at it, and I was a bit disappointed, because like the individual portraits didn't grab me. But when I looked at them as groups, something much more interesting emerged. And these weren't just generic goths. They were wearing his trademark contact lenses. Some had hung crosses upside down around their necks. They'd copied his makeup. And I think in a way it answered my kind of initial question that maybe the girls I'd seen had been influenced by Britney Spears. So I'm going to put the theory to the test, and if anybody wants to shout out, if you can guess at which band these fans were taken at. Yeah, it's pretty easy. Rod Stewart. Oasis, yeah. Bit hard. Madonna, yeah. Bit harder. Anarchy in the UK, yeah. Jimmy Buffett. That was at Madison Square Garden. He just had a birthday. Bob Dylan. Missy Elliott. Katy Perry. Tori Amos. Iron Maiden. Right, I'm going to have to begin to wrap up. Dolly Parton. Very English take. So I hope that with these projects, that's Merle Haggard, by organising photographs and using the typological process, I've managed to throw out some questions for you. I think, is anybody truly original? Are we, how can you deny that we're related to our nearest cousins? And to what extent is inequality acceptable in the world? And this is The Cure. The Casualties. Red Hot Chili Peppers. P. Diddy. Shakira. ZZ Top. Stones. And I'm going to end my talk with a... Thank you.